Barrett Lynn Beck was born on April 12, 1972, in the small town of Sturtevant, Wisconsin. It was a calm and peaceful place where, as the locals often said, nothing much ever happened, either good or bad. Life there moved at a slow pace, crime rates were low, and the town was a popular choice for families with children. Barrett lived in Sturtevant with her parents and her younger brother. She attended the local school, had many friends, and was well liked because of her warm personality. One of her greatest passions was music. She played the violin in her school orchestra. During high school, Barrett began dating a boy named Kurt, and their relationship continued after they both graduated. By the summer of 1990, Barrett was 18 and thinking about her future. She planned to attend college but had not yet decided on a specific career. She was exploring different options, but one thing was clear: they all involved music in some way. In the meantime, Barrett found herself a job to save up some money before starting college. She began working at the office of a fairly large company, and in July of that year, she was scheduled to attend a 3-day seminar to learn how to use computers. This was a major event for Barrett. Just a few weeks out of high school, she now had to travel to another city called Appleton, hundreds of miles away from home, all by herself. At first, Barrett's parents were not very enthusiastic about the trip. They were naturally concerned about their daughter traveling such a long distance alone and spending several days in another city. However, they eventually came around. They understood that she was an adult now and that the seminar was an important part of her job. On the morning of July 17th, they gave her the family van, helped her pack for the trip, and saw her off as she set out on the road. Barrett had promised to call her parents as soon as she checked into her hotel. But as the hours passed, there was still no word from her. Her parents, already uneasy about the trip, became even more anxious, especially since the drive to the city should have taken only a couple of hours. By evening, they decided to contact the hotel, only to learn that Barrett had never checked in. Desperate for answers, they began reaching out to her coworkers, friends, and anyone else who might have seen her that day. But no one had. Despite this, her parents held on to hope. They thought perhaps she had changed her plans, checked into another hotel, or stayed with someone she knew. They decided to wait until morning, hoping for good news. However, when the seminar began and Barrett did not appear, they realized something was wrong and decided it was time to call the police. The police department got involved, but at first, they did not take significant action. They simply issued a notice with a description of her van. Since Barrett was an adult, and there was no clear evidence of foul play, they chose to delay launching a full-scale search and decided to wait. The day passed with no word from Barrett. She did not contact her parents or show up at the seminar. The police also failed to locate her van, leaving everyone in uncertainty. The next day brought no developments either, until July 19th. That was when the police received a report about a van matching the description parked near a supermarket in the small town of West Bend, about 65 miles from Barrett's home. Officers quickly confirmed that it was indeed her family's van and began examining it for clues. The doors were locked, and there was no sign of Barrett inside or nearby. The first thing the officers discovered was a receipt from a Walgreens located just across the street from the parking lot. The timestamp showed it had been issued on July 17th, the day she disappeared. When the police spoke with the employee, they confirmed that Barrett had stopped by around noon. She was alone, appeared to be in good spirits, and her behavior raised no concerns. However, other findings in the van painted a more troubling picture. The radar detector and stereo were missing, suggesting a possible robbery. But that was only the beginning. The interior of the van was covered with cigarette ash, quite a lot of it. Since Barrett did not smoke, it was clear that someone else had been in the van, and judging by the amount of ash, they had spent a considerable amount of time there. Then there were her belongings. Almost everything Barrett had taken with her was still in the van. Her red shirt, the one she had been wearing when she left home, was on the floor, and part of it had been torn. The dress she had planned to wear to the seminar was also there, along with her stockings, which had been tied into a knot. Even the shoes she had worn when she left were still inside. Another detail stood out to investigators. Before Barrett's parents handed over the van, they had recorded the mileage because her company had promised to reimburse her travel expenses. But when the police checked the odometer, they noticed an extra 461 miles. Considering it was only about 65 miles from her home to the parking lot, someone had clearly driven the van much farther before leaving it there. Another clue pointing to another person's presence in the van was the discovery of 2 disposable coffee cups, one from McDonald's and another from Burger King. Since Barrett had likely driven only about 65 miles before something happened to her, detectives doubted that she would have stopped at 2 different places for coffee. These details led investigators to suspect that Barrett might have been abducted or that someone had stolen her van. However, the second theory seemed unlikely. She had been out of contact for several days, and there was still no trace of her whereabouts. The police tried to piece together a timeline of Barrett's last known movements and reconstruct her route. They learned that she had not left home immediately after saying goodbye. Her first stop was to visit her boyfriend, Kurt. He told investigators that they had talked for a while, discussed her upcoming trip and seminar, and then she had left. Kurt said he had not heard from her since. The police found no evidence to suggest that he was involved in her disappearance. However, detectives did uncover something noteworthy. Kurt had given Barrett a fairly expensive ring, which she reportedly never took off. Yet, during the inspection of the van, the ring was found beneath one of the floor mats. Its placement suggested it had been intentionally hidden there, as it seemed unlikely it could have simply fallen off her finger and ended up beneath the mat by accident. If the ring had been removed by an unknown person, it raised another question. Why would someone steal the radar detector and stereo but leave behind a valuable piece of jewelry? Meanwhile, forensic experts completed a detailed examination of Barrett's van and found dozens of fingerprints inside. Police asked her friends and family members to provide their prints so they could rule them out, leaving behind a few unidentified ones. These included fingerprints on a coffee cup, on the inside of one of the windows, and on the boxes of cosmetics Barrett had purchased at Walgreens. But without a suspect to compare them to, these prints did not help move the case forward. While the police continued searching for new leads, Barrett's family organized an extensive search effort. They brought in over 100 volunteers, gave interviews to local news outlets, and searched through hundreds of miles along the route Barrett was supposed to take. In addition, they raised $75,000 as a reward for any information about her whereabouts. Over the following weeks, detectives received several tips, but none of them led to a breakthrough in the case. This continued for more than a month until August 22nd, when the police received a call. A local farmer, driving down a rural road about 18 miles from where Barrett's van had been found, noticed something unusual in a ditch along the roadside and decided to take a closer look. To his horror, he realized it was a human body and immediately reported it to the authorities. Officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. However, due to the advanced state of decomposition, it was impossible to identify her visually. Still, detectives suspected it might be Barrett, and a comparison with her dental records soon confirmed their worst fears. Because of the condition of the body, medical examiners could not determine a specific cause of death. They suggested that the victim might have been strangled, but one thing was certain: this was a murder. Beyond the clear evidence of foul play, there was one particularly chilling detail. A piece of fabric from Barrett's shirt had been tied around her head, covering her eyes like a blindfold. This suggested that she had been kidnapped and likely held alive for some time. Although this likely did not last long, the medical examiner's report indicated that the body had been lying in the ditch for over a month. This led investigators to believe that the killer had murdered her on the same day she was abducted. Unfortunately, the discovery of Barrett's body did not bring investigators any closer to solving the case. Months passed without any major breakthroughs. Detectives interviewed multiple suspects, searched for new evidence, and followed every lead, but each one ended in a dead end. Investigators assumed Barrett might have been the victim of a robbery gone wrong. They believed that when she parked near Walgreens and went inside, someone broke into her van. The intruder might have intended to steal valuables and leave, But when Barrett returned and caught them in the act, things took a darker turn. Fearing being caught, the person may have decided to abduct her, later killing her and dumping her body in a roadside ditch. Adding to this theory was the van's odometer. After Barrett vanished, the van had been driven for nearly 500 miles, much farther than the distance from her home to where it was abandoned. This suggested that her killer had spent a lot of time driving the van before ultimately leaving it behind. Since robbery was considered the main motive, police began focusing on individuals known for similar crimes. Before long, they zeroed in on a man named Craig, who was suspected of stealing several vehicles not far from where Barrett was last seen. What caught investigators' attention was Craig's pattern. He often used stolen cars to commit other crimes and drove them for a while before abandoning them, behavior that aligned with the movements of Barrett's killer. Detectives began looking into Craig's possible involvement and discovered something interesting. Shortly after Barrett's disappearance, he had been arrested for an armed bank robbery. During his arrest, authorities found a bag in his possession. Among its contents was a woman's hairbrush with blonde hair tangled in it. Unfortunately, at that time, DNA testing was not as advanced as it is today. Without the ability to compare the hair to Barrett's DNA, police could not definitively link the brush to the victim. Investigators also learned that Craig theoretically had the opportunity to commit the crime, but that alone was not enough to prove his guilt. However, soon after, detectives received a lead that completely changed the course of the case. During interviews with Craig's acquaintances, one of his friends suddenly revealed that Craig had confessed to killing Barrett. Not only that, but he had allegedly shown him her body inside the van before disposing of it. The revelation made detectives take Craig even more seriously as their prime suspect. But there was one major problem. His fingerprints did not match any of those found in Barrett's van. Craig also denied any involvement, leaving investigators struggling to prove his connection to the crime. Over the following months, they searched for new evidence, but nothing substantial surfaced. At one point, police considered formally charging Craig with Barrett's murder, hoping that the testimony from his friend would be enough to secure a conviction. However, they ultimately decided that without strong evidence, the prosecution would not hold up in court. Despite this, Craig remained the prime suspect, and for years afterward, detectives continued their efforts to uncover new leads to prove his involvement. Unfortunately, this continued for decades without any real progress. But everything changed in 2013, when the case was handed over to a cold case unit for a fresh review. As detectives began going through the old files and evidence, they encountered a frustrating setback. Some of Barrett's clothing, which was supposed to be stored as evidence, was missing, even though it was listed in the official records. The team could not locate it, and it appeared that someone, likely an officer, had mistakenly discarded those items. Despite this, investigators sent the remaining evidence to the lab for testing and requested a new comparison of the fingerprints on file. To their shock, they discovered that in the 23 years since the murder, the fingerprints had never been digitized and were still stored only on paper. Shortly after the prints were uploaded into the database, the lead detective received a call from the lab. The analysts had found a match. 5 of the fingerprints from the van belonged to a man named Dennis Brantner. This name had never appeared in the case files before. Police quickly learned that he had an extensive criminal record, which explained how his fingerprints ended up in the database. In his younger years, Dennis had served time for stealing cars and was later arrested for breaking into someone's home. In another disturbing incident, he had sneaked into a hotel room where a woman was staying, stolen her underwear, and left behind inappropriate notes. But one particular episode caught the detective's attention because of its striking parallels to Barrett's case. Dennis had once broken into his ex-wife's car while she was at work and waited for her to return. When she got in, he pulled a knife and tried to kidnap her. Fortunately, she managed to escape and reported him to the police. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that at the time of Barrett's murder, Dennis was working as a long-haul truck driver in the same area. His job regularly took him through numerous towns and cities, giving him plenty of opportunities to commit such a crime. Still, police wanted to proceed cautiously before drawing conclusions. First, they confirmed that Dennis did not know Barrett or anyone in her family, which might have explained the presence of his fingerprints in their van. But there was one key detail they could not ignore. One of Dennis's fingerprints was found on a box of cosmetics Barrett had purchased just minutes before she vanished. This meant he had been in the van at that exact time, significantly increasing suspicion against him. Investigators decided to confront Dennis and visited his home. Dennis denied any involvement in Barrett's murder and insisted he had never met her. However, when the detectives mentioned that his fingerprints had been found in her van, his demeanor changed dramatically. Dennis became visibly nervous, occasionally breaking into tears as he answered their questions. Despite this, he continued to maintain his innocence, prompting detectives to dig deeper for more evidence. When they interviewed people who knew Dennis, they uncovered several telling details. His ex-wife mentioned that Dennis always preferred Burger King, which he frequented regularly. In contrast, Barrett preferred McDonald's, and as investigators remembered, coffee cups from both fast food chains had been found in Barrett's van, with Dennis's fingerprint on the Burger King cup. Next, detectives spoke with Dennis's former coworkers, leading to an even more startling discovery. After Barrett's murder, Dennis had briefly worked at a factory. 3 of his colleagues recalled that he kept a photograph of a young blonde woman in his toolbox during that time. Unfortunately, after so many years, it was impossible to determine whether the woman in the photo was Barrett, but the coworkers noted a strong resemblance. Another former coworker shared a chilling story. Dennis had once told her that he wanted to kidnap and assault her. While police continued gathering evidence, they received crucial updates from the lab. Despite the earlier loss of some of Barrett's belongings, several items from her van remained in storage, including a cigarette pack wrapper. Using modern forensic tools, investigators discovered a new fingerprint on it, one that also belonged to Dennis. The collection of all this evidence and information took nearly a year, and in March 2015, Dennis was finally arrested and charged with Barrett's murder. But there was a significant challenge. Although Dennis's fingerprints had been found in the victim's vehicle, the prosecution feared that might not be enough for a conviction. By 2015, public perception viewed DNA evidence as the gold standard in criminal cases. Unlike DNA, fingerprints did not establish a direct link to the murder itself. For example, it was possible that Dennis had been in the van under other circumstances, leaving room for doubt about his involvement in the murder. Despite extensive forensic efforts, investigators could not find any DNA samples connecting Dennis to Barrett, her belongings, or her vehicle. Still, the case proceeded to trial, which began in the summer of 2016. During the trial, Dennis's defense lawyer took advantage of the lack of conclusive evidence, arguing that fingerprints alone did not definitively prove his guilt. Eventually, this argument created enough doubt among the jurors that they could not reach a unanimous verdict, and the trial ended in a mistrial. Despite this setback, the prosecution quickly announced its intention to prepare for a retrial. For Barrett's family, the situation was agonizing. For 26 years, they had no idea what had happened to her, and now they had to watch as the man police firmly believed was responsible for her murder escaped punishment. The second trial was scheduled for early 2018, but it came with its own set of challenges. The prosecution argued that Dennis had attacked Barrett with the intent to assault her before killing her, but proving his intentions beyond a reasonable doubt was even more difficult. The severity of his potential sentence depended directly on this argument, placing the prosecution in a precarious position. If they failed to convince the jury of his guilt, Dennis could not be tried for the crime again and might walk free. After lengthy deliberations and consultations with Barrett's family, the prosecution reached a painful compromise. They decided to offer Dennis a plea deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree manslaughter. This ensured that he would go to prison, though for a much shorter period, and the case would finally be considered solved after 28 long years. After consulting with his lawyer, Dennis accepted the deal and was sentenced to the maximum possible term of 10 years in prison. With the time he had already spent in jail since his arrest, his total prison sentence amounted to roughly 7 years. This meant that Dennis would be released at the age of 71. Barrett's parents were understandably upset by the lenient sentence, but they recognized that without accepting the deal, there was a strong possibility that Dennis would escape punishment entirely. For this reason, they reluctantly supported the plea agreement, fearing they might lose their only chance to achieve at least some measure of justice. In memory of their daughter, her parents established a scholarship at her high school, awarded for excellence in music, which exists to this day. It is also worth noting that, decades later, police managed to disprove the testimony against Craig, the first suspect in the case. As mentioned earlier, one of his acquaintances had claimed that Craig showed him Barrett's body in her van, but this turned out to be a lie. It was later revealed that this individual had a personal grudge against Craig and had used information overheard from the police to frame him. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.